Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at the important developing story with reference to what is happening between the Iran-Israel conflict, which of course now has escalated into a much larger issue. And this is something that threatens regional peace and security, particularly after the U.S. attacks on Iran's nuclear sites. We have seen just now that there are a number of reports coming in with regards to attacks in the Middle East, particularly on Doha, which the Iranian state media is also reporting is a retaliation to the U.S. strikes. And so while, of course, that was something that Iran had previously also stated is what is going to happen or what they're preparing for, it is something that has just begun and, of course, worries the entire international community as it can lead to an all-out war. And the situation is very, very precarious in terms of the kind of countries that are involved and the kind of nuclear powers that are also involved in this. And, of course, the possibilities of a lot of other countries also getting involved, particularly in terms of the U.S. military bases that exist in the region. And so what it is that is going to happen and how the story is developing, of course, still remains to be seen. But at the moment, this is what we're hearing, and we're closely watching what the situation is, and we'll be reporting to you and talking in detail about what the Iran-Israel conflict currently, where it stands, and then, of course, what the threat it poses and what is going to be the way forward, whether or not there is absolutely any possibility for peace and dialogue at this point, and what will it take for any of these countries to actually step back, given the kind of violations of international norms and traditions that we've already seen. That is going to be our focus in the show today, and we'll be taking a look at other developing stories in the world as well, with, of course, other domestic issues that Pakistan is also facing, particularly post the India-Pakistan conflict, but that's going to be for later. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farooq Patafi and Raja Faisal, and we've also been joined online by former Ambassador Mr. Nasser Ali Khan. Thank you very much, Nasser, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And I'm going to start with you because this is very, very essential in terms of what we are seeing develop now, what the world, of course, fears in terms of an all-out war, in terms of a lot of countries being involved, and, of course, the kind of threat that it poses to human lives and the existence of so many peaceful possibilities. And so currently what you see in the aftermath of the U.S. strikes on Iran, and now reports coming in of retaliatory strikes on U.S. military bases, what it is that you have to say in terms of what really is going on at the moment, and whether or not the possibility of going back to the table is shrinking. Nasser, can you hear me? We'll try and connect with you once again and see if we can actually hear you, and then hopefully be able to listen to the insight that you can give us in this discussion. But Faisal, let me begin with you as well, given the current scenario and the reports coming in. What is your take on the matter?
Yes, and obviously the latest reports are that Iran has, as it was being speculated, that they will be either attacking all of the air bases that are in the Middle East. Of course, they are in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. It is being speculated that this was one of the retaliation on the table for Iran, and the other one was of course Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz. They are thinking about blocking the trade from there, the ships. And this one, of course, it is appearing now that all of the U.S. air bases, they are at the radar of Iranian missiles, and Iranian missiles, barrages of missiles, they are being sent by Iran to all of these countries. There are two aspects of it. Number one, of course, Iran believes that they are attacking only the U.S. air bases in retaliation to B-2 bomber used by U.S. on Iran to, of course, neutralize all of the nuclear sites which Iran had. And the other aspect is that all of the countries that are obviously being hit, them countries, their sovereignty is being challenged by Iran, and them countries, they happen to be brotherly countries, and they happen to be the other countries of Gulf that are, of course, brotherly countries of Pakistan as well. And in this whole scenario, so far, they have been standing for the principle and that principle was that Iran had the right to retaliate against uh, Israel and against US, but this doesn't mean that their own sovereignty is being challenged by Iran. How it shapes up in coming days and hours, that will be of course looked into. The reports are that all of the air forces of Qatar, of US, of British, of French in the region, they are trying to counter all of these missiles that are being fired by Iran. And so far, from Pakistan side, of course, all of the Pakistanis who are living in these countries, they are being advised to stay at home and don't go near to the air bases that are of course famous for being of US Air Forces and other European Air Forces. And I think at this hour the sanity must prevail, and Iran must show sanity as well, because they should not endanger the lives of people in Middle East. And if we are talking about precision based missiles that are being fired by Iran on these US air bases, it can be said that of course they can't hit US in US, then of course they will be hitting US the any nearest point available to them where US bases are and where US forces are present. And in retaliation to that, of course, they are doing it to retaliation of B-2 bombers attack on Iran. But so far these are the reports. How it further develops, of course it needs to be looked into.
Absolutely. And this is, of course, important in terms of understanding where it is that the situation is headed towards. Nasir, I'll try and connect with you once again. Can you hear me? Unfortunately, we're still unable to connect with him. But Farooq, I'll take your perspective in as well. Yeah. I understand what is going on and what Faisal has, of course, put forward in terms of the developing situation. But really, at the moment, especially now with these attacks happening, and of course, a lot of these countries then doing taking measures in retaliation as well. How do we move back from here towards peace and dialogue, which the countries seem to be reiterating? Even Pakistan, of course, is calling for peace and dialogue. But where do we move away from this point?
Right, Sana, you're certainly talking about an off-ramp. And for the life of me, I kept on actually searching for an off-ramp. I ran various simulations, 6 of them, and in all of them, 2 or 3 things actually stood out. And I'm going to talk about that, but let me also recap what has happened since our last episode. Because in the last episode, we spoke about President Trump saying that for 2 weeks he is not going to make a decision or something to that effect, right? At that time, I pointed out that this is Donald Trump that you're talking about. You cannot be sure what exactly is he going to do. So this is exactly what happened. And at this moment, I think the only person who must be celebrating is Benjamin Netanyahu. Because at that time and until that moment, Iran had not actually struck back. Iran had not tried to expand the war to other countries like the US for that matter, or any of the Arab countries. But once those attacks took place, the cycle of escalation started. That doesn't seem to stop. The simulations that I actually created in that the scenario was the same. And one of them actually distinctly said that the Iranian attacks on US interest in the region is imminent. So that is one thing. But what happens after that? After that, the US will be compelled to strike back, or will be compelled to actually do something in retaliation. And this cycle of escalation eventually is going to lead to some kind of ground commitment. And that means that we are back in the age of, regime changes and also nation building wars. So with that kind of a state of affairs, I don't see any off-ramp right now. Of course, great powers could intervene or try to use their back channels. But the problem here, Sana, is that Israel is also a very effective player. For example, Iranian foreign minister went to Russia and met there as well. But after that, we saw a statement coming from Kremlin that the reason why Russia is not that much engaged is that a lot of Russian nationals live in Israel. So this situation is so complicated that there doesn't seem to be an off ramp. Of course, miracles can happen, anything can change, but I don't think that now there will be a reset button very quickly, unless, of course, President Trump actually believes or finds a way to just model that response only in symbolic or tokenism. But that doesn't seem to be the case right now, because we have seen that his own team seems to be scurrying around compensating for whatever policy changes he is bringing. So at this moment, it seems difficult for anyone to actually stop whatever is happening or to actually reverse this. Dialogue seems to be a very difficult thing to happen.
Absolutely. Ambassador Nasir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. I'm glad I can hear you as well. And I really want your perspective in the current developing situation, because while we talk about, of course, what has happened, and essentially I want to understand how do we move away from this point to peace. But before I ask you the same question that I've asked my colleagues here, I want your take also in terms of when we take a look back at how this has evolved. We've, of course, seen a lot of conflicts in history, and we wonder how it is that everything got so escalated. But at this moment, we're seeing decisions after decisions that are taking place which are not in line with international norms and traditions. And we have a body in place, of course, that is monitoring. We have these international norms and traditions and laws in place for a reason, right? In case there is a violation, there has to be a consequence. But in the way that we've seen these things and dynamics unfold in front of us, what it is that you see in terms of really what is happening, or what the objectives seem to be at the moment, and what are the different parties involved in the current situation really trying to get out of?
Okay, if we go back to why this attack took place and why this war has finally come into Iran, it has been Israel's long-standing aim and demand from the Americans to attack Iran's nuclear facilities, and if possible, try to also bring about a regime change. Now, it seems that when the war started, it was started illegally and unilaterally by Israel. And initially, the Americans said, we have nothing to do with it. In fact, they even said that they were not informed of it. But later, one found out from statements given by President Donald Trump that he had given the green light, so to speak. So one is not sure, but it is in all likelihood that, especially when Iran retaliated, the missiles it was sending to Israel were intercepted by American assets in the region and by other countries that neighbor Israel. So that is one aspect of it. As far as the American involvement is concerned, on the one hand, they were having negotiations. So logically, one would think that they would not want to suddenly go into a war. But once the Israeli and Iranian conflict started, the Americans started giving mixed and different contradictory statements in this regard. The last statement, which was important, was that President Trump had said that I will give 2 weeks to decide whether we are going to be involved in this war or not. In the meantime, I'll advise Iran to come to the negotiating table. Well, instead of those 2 weeks, the attack took place in 2 days. And the attack was a massive attack, which involved about 125 aircraft. It involved submarine missiles, Tomahawk missiles that were launched from there. And in 3 or 4 different places, they used, for the very first time, 32,000-pound bunker-busting bombs to try to penetrate the 80 or 90-meter concrete below which some of these nuclear assets are stored, or the nuclear laboratories are there, or the nuclear centrifuges are there. So it is now a certain this thing that, both the Secretary of State and the President tried to warn Iran not to escalate this. But at the same time, there are two things that I'd like to mention. Looking at the history, the historical reaction, for example, in the case of the murder of General Soleimani, we all knew that Iran would be compelled to reply to this attack. Secondly, if you are trying to say that now we have achieved our objective for the time being, and we would advise you to come to the negotiating table, my point is, once you have destroyed their nuclear facilities, what are they going to negotiate with you about? So, as a result, I think now the point that we have reached today, this attack on Qatar, that will cause a lot of concern and, in fact, panic in the region, has come at a point where it is not good for the whole region. It includes a concern that Pakistan will have that if this war were to be prolonged and it was to be escalated, I think Pakistan would also be very concerned. The other point I'd like to make is that it seems that the fissile material, about 400 kilograms of the fissile material that Iran was supposed to possess, has been moved elsewhere. So the danger of that is that if the state of Iran were to collapse, the rest of the world has to consider whether these assets or this fissile material, which has been moved somewhere, might fall into the wrong hands. And that could be catastrophic. It could be catastrophic for the region. It could certainly be catastrophic for Israel. So you have to realize that Israel is a tiny, tiny country. And one bad event over there can affect the whole population. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is this attack on a base in Qatar, which I think may have been something that Iran just needed to show that it has retaliated, because in actual fact, most of the 45,000 American troops that are in the region have been moved as far away from Iran as possible, because Qatar was extremely close and it's extremely difficult to respond to a missile attack so close. And that's where we are today.
Absolutely. Nasir Saab, then when we take a look at where we stand today, there's also, of course, concern in terms of how different countries will inevitably be part of the developing situation. As you mentioned, of course, the attacks on the military bases in Qatar, and I understand those are US targets, but in terms of the ways that different countries are also involved in the region, and perhaps more can also follow, what it is then that's going to be the response in terms of what these countries will be able to stand up for, or how they will react to the current situation, and what guarantees or strongholds exist in terms of preventing any of that from happening?
Well, let's start with the countries that are immediately involved. The countries that are immediately involved are those that are in the region. They have very few military assets, but they also have a very fragile economy. They have small populations, and their economy relies to a great extent, even today, on oil exports. So, as a result of this, if this conflict were to escalate, there is a chance that the Iranians might try to block the Straits of Hormuz, which it could be economic suicide as far as the Iranians are concerned. But in my opinion, if you push the Iranian regime to such an extent that then they can react in any unpredictable way, this could certainly be one of them. Because even years ago in the Iran-Iraq war, they attempted to block the Straits of Hormuz. So they had reached a point of desperation, in my opinion. But it is not unlikely that this would happen. The other people involved would be the erstwhile friends of Iran, Russia and China. in both these instances, they are showing restraint, and they are certainly not showing any appetite to be militarily involved. They have tried their best to bring the two uh, people to the two countries towards a peaceful solution, and that's where they stand. But looking at what would happen in the future, it is quite likely, first of all, uh, uh, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance have both said that regime change is not our aim. Now, if that is not your aim, which of course is also very difficult to implement, then somehow or the other, the Iranian regime will survive this. But at the same time, they will also realize how important it is for them to strengthen their air defense system and how important it is for them to develop a nuclear weapon. Because you can see a great deal of hypocrisy in this situation. I'm not trying to say that I would like to see a nuclear armed Iran. But on the one hand, you have Israel, which has not signed the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, whereas Iran has. And they have had a nuclear weapon, not a nuclear weapon, but close to 200 nuclear weapons. And at the same time, they are saying that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. So, although I'm not saying that I'd like Iran to have it, but Iran will realize how much more important it is for them to have a nuclear weapon after they have been through this. That is another thing that would be of concern to anybody in the region, because as a reaction to that, the Saudis may ask for one, the Turks may start thinking about having it, because they can see, when you were talking about international law, they can see that Israel has totally flouted any kind of semblance of international law. They don't care about the International Court of Justice. They don't care about anything at all to actually be able to attain their design. And therefore, at the end of the day, this will set a very, very bad precedent. Even the attack that the United States has made, it is against international law. There is no sanction for this. The United Nations Security Council has not even discussed it. And apart from that, it is unconstitutional in the sense that when you go to war, the American president has to take permission or discuss it in Congress. This has not been done. But having said that, the statistics are in that all these wars that have been fought, it has only been on 5 occasions that the Congress has discussed, approved going to war.
Absolutely, and that is a serious issue. And Faisal, I want your take on this too, because when we talked about what it is that, of course, Mr. Trump is championing for, what difference we're going to see as part of his administration, and then, of course, the history that we have seen that exists in terms of other countries that have previously been attacked, or of course, this entire notion of regime change that exists has existed in the past as well. And as Nasser Saab was mentioning, very rarely has that taken place with the Congress. So I want your take in terms of what it is then that the U.S. stands to lose, and especially now, given the fact that military bases have been attacked, how is it that they're going to proceed further with the current situation, and is it not something that will go against their own interests as well?
Yes, and obviously, if we currently look at the situation, the only reason behind Qatar getting attacked from the Iranian side and rest of the other countries are endangered as well. The only reason behind it is presence of US in their country, and I think that presence is going to be of course discussed in coming future.
No, I understand that, but I'm talking about the US response to this now.
Yeah, US obviously holds the rights to respond once more. Of course, they initiated it and they came to help Israel. Already Israel was blasting everywhere within the Iranian territory, but they have been asking for the bunker buster missiles, and that only US had, and US initially, as President Trump is someone who's very unpredictable. He has been, of course, keeping the whole world in darkness about his actions. He has been saying that he believes in talks and he believes in, both the countries like Iran and Israel. They have to sit down and negotiate peace. But at the same time, he was behind the curtains giving orders of, prepare this bunker buster and tomahawks and just bomb Iran. And that's why I'm saying that it is becoming very unpredictable US today. And if we look at European countries, I think including UK, they have been playing positive role since last week. They were address obviously hosting foreign minister of Iran for the talks, and they believe in talks, and I believe that these talks could have been possible if this act wouldn't have happened. And overall, as Ambassador Saab has rightly pointed out, that rest of the countries in the region like Turkey and of course Middle Eastern countries including Saudi Arabia, they must have been thinking that where do they stand in this whole scenario, in which of course the only country, Israel, the smallest country and the country that was imposed on Middle East, that country is being favored and is being helped to of course control the whole region. It is a hegemon, a known hegemon on all over Middle East, and wherever they want they can do anything. And they of course systematically did a lot within Syria and then Iraq as well. And when when we talk about these two countries, their airspace was pivotal in attacking Iran, and that's how it was possible for the Israel to attack Iran so easily from the airspaces of these two countries. And this is becoming a new normal, and I think Middle Eastern countries, they will be realizing this, that this normal is being endorsed by US. I think that's why US has to amend its stance for the Middle East. And as we know that Donald Trump, while addressing his rallies during his election campaign, he kept on saying that he believes in no war policy and he believes in negotiations on the table. Rather than that, we were entirely looking at an opposite Donald Trump, who once again is showing that in American politics it's all about APAC, and whatever APAC says, that becomes the policy of United States, and this is what has been seen. And overall, in the whole scenario, if we deeply look into the positioning of China and Russia, where do they stand? Of course, we know. And recently, I've been talking to one of a prominent think tank personnel from Iran. He categorically said that Iran and China, they are having a hidden pact of 25 years that does include a security pact as well. I don't know to what extent China can help, or how does it work and when does it work. But so far, if we look at the Hormuz, of course that does affect China, but not to that extent. Reason being, we know that when Ukrainian crisis took place, right after that, President Putin was in Beijing, met with President Xi. Both of them agreed upon increasing bilateral trade, which used to be $116.7 billion per year. They increased it to $200 billion. And back in 2023, in a single calendar year, they did bilateral trade of $235 billion. And majority of this trade was, of course, the oil export to China from the Russian side. So they are all okay with that. And when it comes to Europe is going to be the sufferer in this whole scenario if Hormuz gets obviously halted. Reason being, we shouldn't be forgetting that right after Ukrainian crisis, the shortages of energy in the Western countries, they have been initiated from Qatar side and from the Middle Eastern countries to be met. and all of these needs of the Europe, they have been of course catered by the Middle Eastern countries, and these Middle East countries, if there is a halt just because of Middle Eastern crisis, it is very badly going to affect the Western countries, European countries, including UK, and already they have been facing inflation just because of the energy crisis.
Yeah.
It is going to be doubled in coming days, and to me, I think in this whole scenario, they are going to be affected. Talking about Russians and Chinese, I don't think they will be affected by it, but diplomatically speaking, US is going to be very badly affected by this.
Right, and Farooq, I want your perspective on this too, in terms of how is it that the American population is really looking at the situation, and how is it that the US administration is handling it both at home and then of course within the international community. But add to what Faisal also mentioned in terms of the way that countries like Russia or China or Korea are also of course taking a note of the current situation, and how is it that these elements will or will not be part of what is really going on at the moment.
Right, Sana. Fancy you mentioning North Korea or Korea for that matter, because I wanted to actually bring that up, and I wanted to actually begin by commenting on what Ambassador Saab was saying. And my greetings to Ambassador Saab. It is great to see you after a long time. But regarding the lessons that Iran might be learning, I think the first lesson was already out there, but there was an intertwined second lesson too, and nobody perhaps in Iran actually paid heed. One, because North Korea had already gone nuclear, we have seen that somehow they are not immediately attacked by anybody, right? Repeatedly there is some kind of phase down, some kind of confrontation, but because they have their deterrent, and it was like a very easy point to make, that nobody has actually waged a war on them. The second aspect is that unlike Iran, North Korea has actually remained a black box. Instead of stretching itself too thin all over the world, they have actually contained themselves within their four bounds, and they, whenever they are needed, of course, there was this talk of Russia and North Korea cooperation, but in the war. But apart from that, we haven't seen them actually going to places where there might be a force of division. Iran actually ended up offending too many people, right? For example, and by the way, it is again down to America, because around the time of Iraq invasion, there was a vacuum created by America because Israel wanted it. And after that, most of the Shia population in various Arab countries were kind of unhinged. And because of that, we saw Arab Spring, and Iran actually kind of sort of, because of Wali Nasser, Hillary Clinton worldview, they exploited that vacuum. But because of that, their fingerprint is all over. So there are too many forces that are not that much chuffed with them, right? And because of that, and the fact that they did not go nuclear, I would assume that they could not, and that's why they did not. If they had the latent capacity, I think they would have found a way to actually at least carry out a cold test, if not a proper test, right? But apart from that, there are certain aspects that could actually make you believe that there might be some choreography involved here as well. For example, the two countries where American bases have been attacked are rather relatively friendlier towards Iran. Iraq is very friendly. Qatar was one of the few countries that came out in support of, at least diplomatically in support of Iran, and was relatively more vocal than others. So could there be something similar to what Ambassador Saab was referring to Soleimani's time, when there was one attack, but they said, okay, now let's move on, or there is a possibility of escalation that is important. Faisal was speaking about APEC and its importance or its influence on America. I think something else is going on which might be bigger than the Israeli lobby, which is very important. Remember that at this moment, while we keep on talking about multipolar world, kinetically there is still a unipolar world, right? Russia seems to reassert itself, but that is within its own domain of influence. But elsewhere, it is still America which seems to be present everywhere. So, what has happened? Recently, when India, Pakistan exchanged their salvos, what we saw was that everybody was talking about Chinese technology. So I think that President Trump, the salesman he is for America's greatness, so he wanted also some place to actually showcase America's weaponry and advancement as well. For example, you have seen the coverage of Western media regarding bunker busters. There must be other bunker busters. I mentioned 2 bunker busters that Israel possesses even now. But even then, media kept on saying that particular bunker buster is only with America, right? And now too, there seems to be a possibility of projection of power, reassertion of power, that look, we are still the predominant power. Finally, let me remind you that Faisal was talking about economic fallout and World War kind of scenario. So let me actually very quickly remind you that by the way, those simulations that I ran, my WhatsApp channel, Farooq Khan Pitafi, you can go and check there. I have reproduced the entire prompt, and that's very easy to run. But there, repeatedly, 2 or 3 things came out. One, no world war. At this moment, the great powers will be skeptical of some kind of kinetic involvement in this situation. Number 2, economic meltdown. Somehow there seems to be this desire to bring an economic depression to the world, and we have been seeing that throughout President Biden's term, repeatedly pundits saying that we are headed, even though we were facing inflation or stagflation, they said that we are going for a meltdown. And now there seems to be an opportunity to create some kind of economic situation where things fall apart. The third one was, of course, the emergence of multipolarity after this crisis. We still have to see how America deploys its assets in Iran, or whether it commits to a long-term thing or not. But if it does, American power will come under a lot of stress.
Right, absolutely. And Ambassador Nasser, I want your perspective on this, and if you can also add insight into whether it is when we talk about decisions being taken with a rational approach, with sanity prevailing. These are, of course, the ideal ways that we want to look at the situation, and understand that world powers, of course, will be making their own calculations and will not just jump into any decision or measure they take. But I want your perspective on the kind of possibility of even the slightest miscalculation that exists, and then how difficult it becomes for powers like the US or Russia or Korea or China to not be involved in the current situation. Will that be an option anymore?
Well, there's a very interesting analysis that Mr. Patafi has made regarding the multipolar world and the emerging powers. In my opinion, as far as Russia's military might is concerned, it is a very powerful country in terms of its very large nuclear arsenal, which is like more than 6,700 nuclear warheads that they still possess. However, their economy is not equipped to sustain a long-term war with any large adversary. Their economy also relies a great deal on energy exports. Their population is a dwindling population. And there is, unlike America, there is no immigration that goes in there to sustain a population that can become a major power. China, on the other hand, China is the future adversary of the United States. It already is an economic giant, which is a major counterbalance to American economic influence. But militarily, the Chinese policy has been so far not to engage in costly military adventures. You see, they have less than 5 bases outside China. United States has between 700 to 800 bases all over the globe. So there is a huge difference there. But having said that, China wants to continue to have relations with other countries based on their economic relations. They don't want to go in anywhere and use force to compel others to their will. So there is a big difference there. A difference in terms of the perception of the two great powers, and also that the fact that more countries will endear themselves to someone who comes in there to create economic opportunities, to help them build their infrastructure, and to create communication links. This is the policy. There was a Greek historian called Thucydides, whose theory is called the Thucydides trap. He said that whenever there is one great power and there is another power that starts to emerge, eventually the two will clash and there will be a war between them. The only difference is that in the case of China, China is going to have as many people on its side as possible before it ever thinks of any kind of military adventure. I remember in 2002, when we were with India, we were eyeball to eyeball, and war was imminent. President Musharraf flew to China, and he spoke to the president in the hope of explaining our side of this issue, and in the hope that he would offer some military assistance. So, in reply, the Chinese president was silent for some time, and then his advice to our president was that, when China decided to go on this trajectory of economic development, it decided to put all its military and political issues on the back burner and try to become a major economic power. This was the advice he was trying to give to Pakistan: to avoid conflict, to talk to your neighbors, to improve relationships, to avoid expensive wars, and try to make yourself more relevant in the world by becoming more economically strong. That itself will give you political clout. You don't have to be a huge military power. You have to be a country which considers other relations to be strong when both these countries' interests are converging. So this is the way to do it, rather than to either become the world's policeman or to become the world's bully or to become a hegemon. So that is the difference between the two. But at the end of the day, as far as the recent India-Pakistan conflict was concerned, this time, for the first time, you see a more direct approach that China took. And in my opinion, the reason for that was that in 2019, the Indians abrogated Article 370 and 35A. And after that, they started talking about taking over Azad Kashmir, which they call Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And they also started threatening taking over Gilgit-Baltistan. Now, this is something that caused a lot of concern in China, because their Belt and Road Initiative stands threatened, their CPEC stands threatened, and they have invested a great deal in this. So this was the sort of a straw that broke the camel's back. This is when you saw signals coming out of China that clearly said that we will not tolerate any threat to the sovereignty or territorial integrity of Pakistan. But in Iran's case, unfortunately, it's a little further away. They have not only had strong economic relations with Iran, but they have also played a very large role, which unfortunately stands paused at this moment. But they have played a large role in trying to bring Iran to the table with Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia seemed quite receptive to that idea. So their aim is to create peace. You see, the world is already recovering from the COVID pandemic, where, inflation, economies, supply chains are already stressed. And to cause more war, we were talking about the Gulf, the Straits of Hormuz. I can tell you, China does rely a lot on oil from the Gulf. And that is one of the reasons that recently Marco Rubio has actually asked China to talk to Iran, not to think about blocking the Straits of Hormuz.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ambassador Saab, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And thank you, Farooq, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us in the debate. That's always. We'll take a break here for the headlines and keep watching PTV World.